Do you think in the old days, cavemen had to worry about media analysis then? Like, oh, Moke just made this cool new mammoth painting. But then the snob Snock walks into the cave and he's like, you look at that composition, no good. Cave tigers should not be next to big mammoth hugging. That make no sense. Bad media. 1 out of 5 on Cave Boxed. I'm sure someone out there in prehistoric times had that issue, but that's never gone away. There's a million snocks that have existed since the first one way back when, from movies to books to normal art, and now even video games. Media analysis and critique is always there ever looming, but that's not a bad thing. It's a yin and yang cycle where art is created and has to be judged and continuing forever and ever and ever. But you're probably wondering, why are we talking about cavemen in a video talking about a 30-year-old video game? And for that one, I would say I have to start somewhere. Mega Man X1 is the best video game ever made. Video over. Now, it's not that simple. Mega Man X1, though, is almost an untouchable, and especially in the wider gaming community, because it's viewed as one of those ultra top retro games that define the genre. You get your articles like your top 10 best SNES games ever made, top 50 games every gamer must try once in their life. Those kind of basic clickbait articles. It's pretty normal to see that with Mega Man X1. It's seen as one of the best in the franchise. And that's never really been a changing sentiment. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. With Mega Man, there's a lot of shifting tides, you could call it. Many games will have favorable or unfavorable opinions, which will shift to the opposite way as time goes on. Obviously, that isn't an original concept. Mega Man isn't the only franchise where people change their opinions on certain games, but it's something I've noticed as someone who's been playing these games for at least a decent amount of time. You've seen games like Mega Man 8 switch from their initial opinion of being really disliked to being more appreciated for the things it does, or Mega Man 2, which was seen as one of the top games similar to X1, kind of being put down as a product of its time and not that great in comparison. But X1 never had that. It's never really been different. Like I said before, it's a consistent greatness that it's had for so long. Of course, you're probably wondering as the audience, well, what do you think of X1? You've been given this whole 3-minute yap sesh about what everyone else thinks of X1, but what do you think? What do you think of this game? And I would say that's an amazing question. But to really delve into what I think of it, you have to start at the very, 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 very beginning. The intro stage. So X1 is really unique for the franchise since at the time this was the first intro stage in the series. Older games would simply have you press start and immediately get into the game, but now you have a almost pre-game level which is able to show you the game's new mechanics and communicate the ideas of level design and combat, which will become center stage later in the game, which is awesome. But frankly, I think this level blows. Psyched, I just tricked you. You thought I was gonna say this level is dog shit ass horrible? In reality, I think it's just less than stellar. I do much enjoy how the highway can get destroyed by enemies and how you're learning the wall jump pretty early on. Even if the platforming itself in this level is pretty less than great, I still feel the core things the game wants to teach you are communicated properly enough that you're able to go into later levels and do it way better because of the little things you're doing in this level first. The core issue I have with this level is really just how uninteresting it is as a level itself. Sure, I'm learning how to do things that are important for this game, but at the same time, I'm not doing interesting things to learn it. Instead, I'm just fighting very uninteresting enemies and doing very not engaging platforming. Like, it shouldn't be this monotonous to play through. For example, take the Beyblades. First time, really good. Second time, why is there a second time to begin with? The first time was good enough on its own and teaches the player everything they need to learn immediately. The second time happens immediately after the first and does nothing more for the level except padding it out in a way that feels incredibly unnecessary and very boring. Now when you reach the end of the level, you have the scripted loss against Vile, and I really quite like this. Giving the player a goal of being another character or just getting stronger in general is really easy game designer 101 of giving the player a really tangible goal that isn't story related, a side goal, but it's still really good in a really well delivered way. Even if I, in all honesty, have some complaints we'll get to later on in this video about this whole fighting Vile and getting stronger to defeat him. Of course, this is only the first level of the game. I shouldn't be super horribly critical of the entire product. I still have a bunch of other stages to go through. So let's start with the 8 Mavericks and Chill Penguin. So to quickly sum up, Chill Penguin is split into 2 sections, pre-dash and post-dash. Now the first half of the level is a very nothing burger section. There's nothing really specific to complain or even compliment more than just I like the enemy placement or I think the platforming is okay, but besides that there's really nothing else to specifically say that's interesting with this section. Now when you get the dash, everything changes, like an immediate tonal shift. From before, where it's very there level design, nothing really important to speak of, now you have more things to do, at least with the dash allowing you to skip enemies, and that mechanic you get is really interesting, and this level section really highlights that a lot, especially in its first moments, where you're able to either just fight the birds or entirely skip them, and the level design feels entirely complementary to that idea. The ride armor section is short and okay, and is really nothing to speak of since it's just teaching the player about this really cool mech thing you can use in a couple levels in the game. The snowball section is definitely my favorite of this level by far. The enemies in the rising slope, along with the dash, provide a really fast-paced piece of level design that really works well for the player and allows them to see the full potential of what the dash can really do. If the second half of Chill Penguin was just a testing drive for the dash, I frankly would ask to buy the range and not the actual car, because this is a really good demonstration of everything the dash can do in a really short, concise section. Chill Penguin is a really good boss fight. He has a large variety of attacks of ice projectiles, ice obstacles, the ice storm, and simply charging or jumping at you that create an incredibly interesting environment that the player has to adapt to on the fly. And that's why Chill Penguin is close to, if not my favorite Maverick from this game. Launch Octopus is what you would call a mini-boss rush stage, where the entire mechanic of the level is just fighting mini-bosses over and over and over again. And I mean that in an incredibly derogatory manner, because beside the mini-bosses, this level has absolutely nothing going for it. Each section between mini-bosses is 1 or 2 enemies and very minimal platforming, and it's incredibly boring for that reason, because I don't feel like I'm doing anything. It just feels like the game wants me to move a little feet before I trigger the next cutscene to fight an actually important part of the level. Oh, and the mini-bosses. While there are 5 fights to go up against, there aren't 5 different mini-bosses, but rather 3, 2 of which having 2 versions for each fight. 2 of these fights are optional to go up against, however if you want the heart tank, you have to fight them. For Caruzalizer, you're able to go to the mines he launches on the seafloor or fight him directly to go underground and get the heart tank. Both options are fun, and this is easily my favorite mini-boss of this level since it actually provides some amount of a challenge either way you go, and also is the only one that isn't doubly repeated in the level. Anglerge, the fish mini-boss, doesn't fare much better, however. The first fight is incredibly boring, as the only real challenge is trying to dodge the tentacles and figure out which pattern it's going to take, which is interesting, although I wish there were better tells presented by the game of which path it's going to take. The second fish is basically the exact same, although a different color, and also having spiked floors, but let's be real here, I don't think anyone's ever died to that. Since the fish uses a suck-in attack which draws the player closer, you're constantly given almost a safe haven to be protected from falling into that trap. Unlike with the Bee-Bladers in the intro stage of this game, these 2 fights happen immediately after one another. There's no time to process the level you're playing. Instead, you're going through an almost pseudo-crappily made boss rush. And then you have Ouroboros. Ouroboros? Ouroboros? How do people say that one? This mini-boss takes the cake for being the worst fight by far, considering the fact that it actually has no attacks, and all it does is just swim around the level. You may think I'm joking, no, he has no attacks. The only difference between the fight underground and the fight above ground is that the Ouroboros in the sand gets to hide, and you have to wait longer to actually fight and defeat him. And here's a question, why are there 2 to begin with? The arenas are connected, so they presumably are the exact same Ouroboros, so wouldn't it make more sense and rewarding for the player to defeat one and then the other fight would be cancelled out? Because all you get in the actual game is two incredibly uninteresting and boring fights. Like, this fact just genuinely baffles me. X1 is a pretty good game at rewarding the player by changing the stage up for them doing a harder task, but not doing it here just feels like an incredibly wasted opportunity. Launch Octopus is just a bullet hell light. Two of the three attacks he fires at you are just spammy projectiles, and the third being a tornado which can suck out your HP if you're caught, but is so easy to walk away from that you never really get caught unless you're just not paying attention. The fight is just pretty dry through and through. You're forced to basically spam pellets all the time, and there's nothing else really interesting to speak of with this fight because the only thing he will do is just shoot constantly at you. So when it comes to Armored Armadillo, honestly, well, I don't really have a lot to say. I just like this level. The combat, which has a lot of enemies coming at you in different ways, requiring you to use different weapons in multitude of manners, is wonderful to see in this game. And the platforming, while in all honesty a bit barren, is still pretty serviceable for what the level wants to do. The minecarts are probably my biggest complaint with this level. They're a real one and done type deal. They don't really give you anything to do. You just stand on the platform as it goes across and you have to just wait until you're able to do a jump, which can be cool when you do the jump, but at the same time I did nothing that past 20-second sequence, so I just wasted most of my time. Granted, you can just entirely skip the minecart and walk on your own, but since the game's kind of expecting you to do it, I might as well do what the game wants. Honestly, if you just kept only the last minecart, it would just be some Uncharted-ass cutscene, especially with the waterfall in the background, right before the boss of the level. But since there's 3 of them, I'm just kind of sick and tired and I'm waiting for the section to end. But do not forget the mole borers. They're okay. But what really holds me back from calling this my favorite level is undoubtedly the boss. Like, holy shit, Armored Armadillo is the worst boss in the entire game, and I'm dying on that hill. The main issue with Armadillo, ignoring the fact that he only has 2 really basic attacks, has to do with how X1 does its boss damage table. For some unexplained reason, the X1 devs put the bosses in 3 categories. Bosses which take 1, 2, 3 damage from each respective charge level, taking 1, 1, 2 damage from each respective charge level, but yet even more befuddling, they chose Armored Armadillo to take 1, 1, 1, meaning that no matter what charge level you use, it will always deal 1 damage. Like, oh my god, how fucking stupid of a choice is that? No matter what you do, always dealing 1 damage just creates a fight that's just nails on a chalkboard for minutes on end if you're just unlucky with how he's shooting at you. It's the dumbest choice, and this is why he's absolutely the worst Maverick in the entire game. With Chameleon, in all honesty, I have like even less stuff to really say compared to Armadillo. The enemy placement is really good while the platforming is pretty bare bones in comparison. The ride armor section is cool. Nothing else really to say other than that though. The most notable part of this level is RT55J, the mini boss who defends the armor part. A tough cookie with like 1 attack besides jumping. But when you defeat him, the stones which normally fall in the cave below no longer fall, which is a really cool extra reward for defeating this tough fight. Take notes, Octopus! Chameleon's main mechanic is to go invisible and camouflage into his environment where he's invulnerable for some amount of time. And this mechanic is really stupid because since he can choose when to come in and come out, he's able to do the horrible path of turn visible, hit you for 1 attack really fast, go invisible again, and stay there for as long as he wants. And that can lead to incredibly tedious fights, which just really suck. This isn't a horrible fight that's as bad as Armadillo, but it's still an incredibly boring fight that can take way too long if the boss just wants to be an asshole. Mandrill and Mammoth are the 2 reasons I absolutely despise X1's stage effect mechanic. Both levels themselves are really good, with Mammoth's factory feel and the power grid of Mandrill allowing for really unique stages, but the issue isn't themselves, but rather what happens when you beat another stage in this game. For context, stage effects are defeating 1 boss and causing a change in a different level. This can range from small minor things to level flipping effects. I like the idea in concept, but with Mammoth and Mandrill, the changes are so bad the levels become essentially neutered. For Mandrill, Death Rogamer from Storm Eagle stage crashed into the power facility, removing all electricity from both the mini-boss and the floors. And while on paper that sounds cool, all you get in return is just blacked out level design for most of the level, and it's a lot worse in comparison. In Mammoth's case, Chill Penguin freezes over the floor of the factory, and while you're now able to get the heart tank, you get that item at the cost of removing any of the unique challenge you get from this level. While obviously neither of these levels are perfect in their original state, it's important to see that in comparison, the stage effect versions are so much worse. And Sting Chameleon is just a perfect example of how to do a stage effect in both a small yet important way. You're now able to access the heart tank, and you're not actually breaking the core level itself. For Mammoth, he's just kind of there. Imagine RT55J if he shot a projectile or changed the floor direction every once in a while, but beside that, Mammoth is just a pretty middle ground, mid-tier boss fight. For Spark Mandrill, on the other hand, honestly, he's not even that bad of a fight without the weakness. He's pretty fun. I do like his variety of attacks, and he can be pretty interesting and a pretty notable threat if you give him the chance. And I would just say pretty good. Gold star from me. Now, with X1 adding wall jumps to the franchise, it's kind of strange how there's only one level which really takes full advantage of this entirely new system. And that level, of course, is Boomer Coanger. This is easily the most unique level of the entire game, going only up for basically the entire stage with one straight line flat section that still takes advantage of the wall jump if you know what you're doing. It's such a fun blast to go through. The enemy placement is really well done. It makes the player really think about what they want to do, and they have multiple routes of how to approach this level. Even later sections of the level, you're able to take at your own pacing and discretion, or just playing how the normal game wants you to. And that's what Coanger is all about. You're able to play it your own way, and it's just such a fun speed blast, especially with the dash. This level is just easily my favorite. It's incredibly well designed, and it's very fun. And again, it's the only level in X1 that truly takes full use of what the wall jump and wall dash can do in this game. Unfortunately, our lives cannot be perfect, and neither can this stage. My one real issue is the elevator midway through. These spike platforms are very awkwardly placed, and the enemies, even though they're always set to show up at the same time, just feel like they're thrown at you randomly and don't really feel coherent. Now, Coanger himself is basically just a better version of Chameleon. He has two attacks, sure, but his teleportation makes him very erratic and unpredictable in a way that makes the fight way more engaging than something like Chameleon. Sure, he's able to spam the teleportation, but it's the kind of spamming that allows him to constantly show left and right, close or far, that keeps the player on their toes. And even with the small amount of attacks he can do, he's still a very viable threat for the player. I would love to say we're ending this chapter on a high note, but I can't because I think Storm Eagle stage is close to, if not my least favorite level in the entire game. The main issue with Storm Eagle is how time-wasting both of his main set pieces are. Both sections have the player waiting on platforms to progress further into the level. The issue though is while you are waiting for said platforms, there is no real challenge to be spoken of. In the first part when you're going up, there's some enemies to your left and right. They can't attack you, and the only one able to grab you helps you progress further in the level, so already off to a great start. Now the second part has you waiting for platforms to become even to move on, but this part is even more tedious than the first. It goes on for much longer, and there's only one fire shooting enemy which is repeated over and over throughout that part. The silver lining is definitely the end of this level. It has some pretty fun enemy placement that allows for good weapon usage, which is always a good plus, but it doesn't really save this stage from the mediocrity it's drenched in. No, wait, hold on. I'm getting some news here. There's a tower, and if I kill this enemy, it blows up all the glass? Holy shit, this level's actually really good, I'm sorry. Storm Eagle is alright. He's able to fly up high and swoop down at the player from left or right, and while the move is cool, he can spam it into oblivion, which makes it much more annoying than it should be. The rest of the fight is kind of brain dead. An egg which spawns some birds is really easy to deal with, and both of his wind attacks are negligible to even mention here. He's not horrible, but I really wouldn't go speaking any positives about him in all honesty. And those are the 8 Mavericks. Hooray! Even though I've talked about each one individually, I haven't really given an overall opinion of what I think of them. So here goes. I think all of these levels get massively hurt because of how this game handles its dash. So far, I've talked, if not at least hinted at how I feel about the dash. It's cool, but the problem with how this game handles it is exactly because of the fact that it's placed specifically in Chill Penguin's level. Since the player isn't expected to have the dash from the get-go, each level that isn't Chill Penguin has to be designed around the fact that the player just might not have it. As a result, the other 7 levels design feels kind of dumbed down once you get the dash. Sting Chameleon, or Storm Eagle, or Launch Octopus each have sections which you're able to use the dash in really fun ways and skip a lot of enemies, but it doesn't feel intentional, more of the level was designing you to have a much more rigid movement. Sure, there are certain parts of certain levels which can use the dash in more efficient ways. I think Boomer Coanger is probably the best example of this, but it still feels odd, and I think that is more of a black sheep compared to the rest of what these levels do. And that's why, at worst, I feel like a lot of these levels are not Mega Man X levels, but rather Mega Man Classic levels. If you put some of this stuff in like Mega Man 10 or Mega Man 8 or 7 or 3, I wouldn't be surprised. I'd honestly feel like they're pretty standard for what a classic level would do. And that's why the dash being there makes it feel like an anomaly. I'm bringing a whole new mechanic to levels which don't really fit the vibe of what this game wants to go for. Obviously, this is X1 though. There's not anything for it to fall back on or reference that isn't just classic material. So as a result, a lot of classic level design comes into this game, which makes it more understandable, but it still sucks because this is a whole new series and there should be new expectations, especially with the new mechanics this game is bringing in. But on the positive side, X1's dash on its own is alright. At most, platforms will sometimes eat your dash, so you lose your movements. And there are a lot of complaints I could give with X1's dash that usually stem from what later games do with it, but since we're not talking about later games, just imagine a Pandora's box that will open years in the future. Stepping away from the dash, X1 uses item collection in a really interesting way. In old classic games, you had 1 or 2 main items to collect or some E-tanks and obviously your 8 weapons, but you were generally consistent in the strength you had from start to finish. But in X1, it's the complete opposite. You're incredibly weak the moment you press start, and you have to get stronger by beating bosses and collecting the items in each of their stages. The player is both able to feel and see how much stronger they're getting, and that's a good way of having them get invested in the journey of X and themselves as time goes on. For example, take the armor set. While I've talked about the dash at length, there are still 3 other components which make the player stronger in their own unique ways. The chest piece is really good, it just reduces damage by 50%, it's simple and well executed, and there's nothing else really to say about it. Now for the arm part, you're able to charge to a 3rd level and also charge your special weapons, but I think my personal issue is it feels inconsistent in how much damage it does and also doesn't feel stronger than what I already had, so it ends up being a meh upgrade that I'm not the biggest fan of. For some reason, X head parts are generally just useless or not that good, and it all starts with X1's, where it has an incredibly meaningless mechanic of breaking blocks that come into contact with the head. And the reason it's meaningless is because there's barely anything in this game that it's actually usable on. Like, let's go through all of its uses together. You're able to get some health in Armadillo, you're able to get the arm part from Mammoth, and you're able to break blocks which fall from the ceiling in Chameleon stage. You can stop the stones from falling to begin with, while somehow still being able to be hit by them even with the head part on if you touch them from the wrong angle. And with Mammoth, you will always get the arm part whether you get it here or not, meaning that both of the main uses of the head part are easily skippable, making this an unhelpful armor part to round out the set. I think my main point here is even if not every single item in this game is amazing, X1 still does item collection in a very straightforward, well-executed manner that allows it to be unique time and time again in a way that's different than how older classic games allowed replayability to happen. Weapons in Mega Man are one half of the bread and butter that makes this series Mega Man, and if you don't have a good weapon set, you basically do not have a good Mega Man game. But luckily for X1, I'd say these weapons are very good. For me personally, Mega Man weapons fall into 3 main categories, A being Buster clones, B being the Buster but doing something slightly different, and C being entirely unique weapons. Obviously, none of these groups are strictly bad or good, it's more of a general simplistic way of viewing Mega Man weapons as a whole. And for X1, while there are no Buster clones, Storm Tornado, Shotgun Ice, Chameleon Sting, Electric Spark, and Boomerang Cut are all the Buster but something slightly different, while Fire Wave, Homing Torpedo, and Rolling Shield are all entirely unique weapons. I'm going to assume you, the audience member, knows what each of these weapons do, so I'm not going to explain each of their individual mechanics and just go through what I like and dislike about them. Electric Spark is the weakest of the 8 in my opinion. Since not many enemies are on walls, its core ability is generally useless in the game, and because of the damage, it's essentially just a slightly better Buster shot. But the charge is still good though, at least. Chameleon Sting is pretty solid, but the charged version of it is incredible. Being invincible is just such a cool ability to have, and it lets you blaze through any part of a level. Homing Torpedo is pretty good overall, but its charged version is what's more interesting. Because of how many projectiles it has, yet how little damage it does, it ends up only killing 1 or 2 enemies most times you can use it, and it becomes overall pretty unfun to have. While its small range may seem like its downfall, Fire Wave is incredibly fun to use. Its high damage output and just general enjoyment level makes it one of the top weapons for me. The charged version is kind of weird though. Any situation where it's good, the uncharged version just does way better, so it just ends up being overall useless. Boomerang Cutter is pretty unique. I actually quite like it. Being able to bring back items is always a blast, and it moves up or down depending on your momentum. And the charged form is also really good. You know, this is just a standout weapon overall. Shotgun Ice is pretty alright most of the time, even though for some reason it'll randomly change how much damage it's doing to the same enemy, so that's always a weird problem I have with it. And its charged version is really useless. Like, I'm sure someone out there has a perfect moment when this is the most useful weapon in the entire game, but most of the time it's pretty just randomly garbage for no reason. Rolling Shield I absolutely love. With its high damage and bouncing off of walls, it just feels like a very powerful bowling ball you get to shoot around all the time. Its charge though, while being basically a weaker and more situational Chameleon Sting, is still quite fun. If you find the right position to use it in, you feel like a really smart person. And this is probably my favorite weapon of the entire game. Storm Tornado is X1's de facto strong weapon, and in all honesty, I find it kind of boring. Its strength is its only defining trait. Like, other weapons sure are weaker than this, but they have more creative uses and are honestly more fun to use than Storm Tornado. Yes, I'm using Storm Tornado to kill everything in the level, but I don't feel like I'm doing anything really interesting with it, so it ends up being kind of close to one of my lesser used weapons in terms of how much I actually like it. The charge, while good, suffers a lot from its lack of use. Because of how little X1 does vertical level design, it ends up kind of just becoming incredibly situational and never being able to reach its true full potential. For the one person asking about the Hadouken, yes, I think it's cool, and I also love super awesome, super secret references. And those are the 8 weapons. Like I said before, I quite enjoy this set. I think it's very well made, and even if I have complaints, I think overall the quality of all these weapons together makes up for the problems that I have. But now that we've gone through the Mavericks and weapons, it's finally time to tackle the finale, the Sigma stages. Fortress stages, in essence, are just final exams for video games. Everything you've learned throughout the playthrough come together in this large mishmash of ideas, which in theory should be harder, but also more rewarding because you're actually putting to use all the things you've learned throughout the game. X1's Fortress stages, however, follow that idea, but just kind of in a weird way, and to make sense of that, let's just start with Sigma 1. And in all honesty, this is the only quote-unquote level of the 4. Starting with some fun enemy placement and then going to a less than stellar platforming section, it can be kind of slow at times, along with enemies constantly spawning over and over. It's finicky to jump between each platform. Frankly, I'm just not a fan. Then you enter inside the actual fortress, where there's again some fun, okay enemy placement, good weapon usage can be used out of this. You climb up ladders, and then you finally find him. Vile. Him and Zero tussle, Zero is captured, you lose to Vile for the second time, Zero sacrifices himself, you defeat Vile, and then you talk to Zero as he fades away Infinity War style. And now the rest of the level can happen. Awesome. But wait, you lose to him a second time? And here's kind of the logic breaking of the one main story element X1 has that isn't just fighting Sigma. Losing to Vile the second time really doesn't make sense from any thematic purpose. The whole point of the game is that you're supposed to get stronger over time, and I feel like the really obvious thing to do here is you're able to defeat Vile in his ride armor with all the new items you get, but you can't. No matter how strong you are in this game, you are never able to defeat Vile's right armor, which is such a strange choice. Both times Zero has to save you. Sure, that can be some amount of friendship always matters, even against like the strongest opponents, you always need help, even if you are strong yourself. But for some reason here, it just feels hollow. Zero's line of "you may be as strong as him someday" feels flat because you aren't even able to damage his right armor. He was able to in the first level of the game, and you can't even do it in the finale. It's such just a horrible choice. I feel like really breaks the storytelling that this game is trying to go for. Like, the easiest way to do this is just have Vile kill Zero, and then you fight both the right armor and the normal form, and then Zero's like, "Oh, you're so strong now, I'm so proud of you," and so the player can actually feel rewarded for all the progress they've made throughout the game. For the actual Vile boss fight, it's kind of underwhelming, and you can maybe phrase that as, "Oh, you know, this guy who's so tough and scary is actually super weak in reality," but the actual fight is just very meh in my head. He goes off screen a bunch, he just has a lot of basic projectiles. It can be kind of hard, but overall this fight's really nothing to speak about. The next part is this weird bouncy pad laser wire section. Like, the bouncy pads have never been used in any other point in the game, so it's just kind of a weird addition. And the next part is the only real vertical section in the entire game that isn't just Coanger, and this part it's just enemy spam. Like, basically, there's nothing else to say. It's just not fun because it's just a constant billion enemies at you at all times. And as you cross the door, you see the man behind it all. Boomer Coanger? Yeah, so X1 handles boss rushes a little differently than how most Mega Man games do. For some reason, rather than just doing it all in one dedicated stage, this game just puts them littered around the first 3 Sigma stages, which I personally have a lot of opinions on, but we'll talk about that more when we get to Sigma Stage 2 and 3, because those stages are more egregious with how they handle their boss rush sections. And after the final section of enemy clutter, you reach the actual boss of the level, so happily named Boss Spider. I don't think I've ever met someone who's genuinely enjoyed this fight to like a large degree. Sure, the fight can be interesting how it's unique in every single attempt by how it handles its wires, but it's the kind of fight where it's not horrible in design, it's more just horrible in the sense of I don't like fighting it at all. I can't really say much about this fight other than it's just kind of a slog to get through on any replay. Going back to the boss rush for a moment, I feel like X1, with its handling of having each boss be littered throughout levels, honestly hurts the fortress stages more than they should. Because of the fact that each level now has to account for the fact the player will be going up against at least 3 or 4 bosses per level, each actual platforming and enemy fighting section has to be shortened in comparison. Sigma 3 is especially guilty of this crime, since it has to cram the last 5 bosses of the Maverick roster into a single level plus the one fortress fight. It ends up becoming a very long and dull experience, where no platforming section can really be that long or try new things because it has to be easy so the player can progress and actually fight the bosses. This is why I don't really like how X1 does its boss rush, because it hurts each of the levels. Sigma 1 at least has the most platforming and enemy fighting, Sigma 2 has some, not to the degree of Sigma 1, but Sigma 3 has barely anything noteworthy beside the little final section, which even then, that just feels like straight enemy clutter. Sigma 2 I do quite like, maybe not to the degree of Sigma 1, but it's nowhere near as bad as Sigma 3. It's definitely way too short in my opinion. Because of the bosses just being there, the level has to be way shorter than it can, and that really hurts because the platforming and the challenge you get are actually quite fun. When it comes to the other 2 fortress bosses of Rangda Bangda and D-Rex, honestly, these are just really good fights. I think D-Rex can be a bit hectic in a bad way, his movements can be a bit unfair, but both fights overall are actually really fun, and I think the biggest tragedy of these 2 is they don't feel like unique tough enemies, but rather, oh, this is just another boss I have to fight after the 3 I just went through during this level. And honestly, that's why I like when Mega Man has the boss rush as a solo stage. Sure, it can be very tedious having to fight all of them back to back to back, but I would much rather have one single contained level for these 8 fights rather than them permeating through the rest of the levels and make them all worse by default. Of course, we still have one level left. The final level of Mega Man X1, Sigma Stage 4. Entering the final level, you have these 2 caterpillar dispensing holes, which obviously they're there for farming, but don't really make sense from a logic perspective, like does Sigma think these will actually kill X? Then you enter the final room and meet Sigma proper. A small side note, I don't like how the stage select spoils you on Sigma's appearance way before you ever meet him. It just feels really random to do, and I'm just not a fan of it. Back to the actual fight though. Sigma appears, congratulates you on making it this far, and goes, well, if you want to fight me, you gotta fight my pet dog here. And you have Velgarder now. Velgarder's not even really that bad of a fight. He moves around pretty fast. His attacks can be varied, even if it's just two. I do quite like how he gets knocked back by your Buster shots. It's a bit of good storytelling of you're that strong, you can just knock the floor with this dog. To be fair, it's a dog. But he's a pretty decent first phase for this fight. Sigma reappears once Velgarder's destroyed, now brandishing a lightsaber. But the phase two is honestly really pathetic of a boss fight. He jumps between the walls constantly. He'll occasionally fire a projectile and swing his lightsaber at you, but it's not the kind of challenging I was expecting for a final boss. It's a very easy phase and just feels really sad to go up against. And once you defeat normal Sigma, soon his head rises to the top of the wall and he turns into Wolf Sigma, the true final boss of X1. Wolf Sigma is a really good final boss to finish out the game, his overwhelming size giving him an even more intimidating look on top of his unique appearance. I feel like his main attacks of fire and electricity are pretty basic as they're just carbon copies of one another. However, the two hands are well executed with both their actual movement and attack tails, letting it be more of a hectic creative fight you have to deal with. Him only really taking damage from Rolling Shield and not at all the Buster is a slightly strange choice I don't really get, but I guess I'll just live with it. It's in essence a really strong and tough fight to deal with, but I very much enjoy it. But as Sigma laments his defeat, X leaves and watches as the fortress crumbles into the sea below, reflecting on the tragedy he's just gone through. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is X1. With the game done, though, I still have one major question left to answer. What do I really think of X1? We've been through thick and thin, and I've complained a lot about what this game can do at times, but I feel like overall this is an incredibly solid entry to start the series. Sure, it has a lot of growing pains it's going to have to figure out, and later games do at least finish what it starts, but X1 accomplishes what it wants to do by bringing a familiar yet unique take to the Mega Man franchise. And that's why I feel safe in giving X1 a solid like 3.5 or 4 out of 5. It's a good game with definite issues I think hold it back from being a standout hit, but it still is really good as a game it wants to be. And that's all she wrote. I've been working on this video for the better part of 2 years in some shape or form. And it kind of lines up. The 30th anniversary was 2 years ago, and on the 17th, when this video comes out, it'll be the 32nd anniversary. Time really goes by fast for some people. Mega Man's been going through a lot recently, though. We have the dual override announcement that happened recently. I'm really hyped. The Star Force collection's on its way too. I'm really happy to spend $30 on a bunch of games I've already played a bunch of times before. You know, I've just been Mega Man's on the up and up. I've been really happy about that. I've been a fan for the past 7 or 8 years, depending on when exactly I started playing. It's been a blur mostly. I really hoped you enjoyed this video. I worked as hard as I could with the software and the everything I have, and I hope that shows. And I hope you really cared about at least what I generally had to say. It's crazy that I can just say all of my opinions, and hopefully there'll be someone out there in the world who would just listen to it, just unadulterated everything I think. It's wonderful. Like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, feedback, opinions. If you hate me, if you want me to like explode into a million pieces off the planet, anything is fine. I have a Twitch. Maybe follow that if you like. Hopefully in the future want to see me live stream. I don't know if I'll ever do it again. Maybe depending on the audience. Uh, just any amount of support is fine. Even just watching the video to this far is good enough for me. I'm really happy I got this done. I never thought what I would be doing in my life when I'm like this old and I'm just doing all this content. But I guess that's just how life is. So, thank you and goodbye.